Our Mayfair Hotel soirees have gone online. We are now running these events weekly on a Zoom call. As you know, it's our motto that business should be sophisticated and fun. So our members come together not only to see other members' amazing projects, but to also hear TED Talk speakers brought right into your front room, to hear comedians and singers, and generally to all get together, raise a glass, lift our frequency, and realise that we are all in this together. We bring people together. We have wonderful advisors who can help you through these difficult times. And until we can all get together again, this really is like a night out staying in. We also showcase wonderful businesses to our fantastic network of investors. We do not give financial advice. We are passionate about projects that impact the world. To apply to be a member and join our weekly events, please do click on the link below, and then we can see you there online. Have some fun with us. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday at 8 o'clock.
One of the questions I thought would be interesting is what kind of, because obviously you've been so motivated for so many years around making a difference and around, you know, taking down the corruption and the establishments. I'd like to know what has inspired you in your life, if that's okay, before we get into the bones of what's going on.
Sure. I have a very unusual education, which is being a war child. So I grew up in the Rhodesian Zimbabwean War for Independence. So the first 15 years of my life was just a lot of gunfire and grenades and tanks and camouflage, and growing up in a really nasty environment. So that is really what inspired me, I think, as a child, when I then became a refugee effectively for about 9 years. At the end of the war, was given safe haven in England, but I was effectively a refugee. I didn't have a passport and I was stateless for that period of time. So it was really by my mid-20s, I'd been a refugee and a stateless individual for 10 years and grown up in a war for 15 years. So that is really my background to having become then a peace activist and someone then involved in seeking interfaith and intercultural fellowship and peace for many years. When I set up my foundation after my rock and roll career, I set up my Peace Foundation, and that led me increasingly into truth and disclosure, because as my diplomatic work continued around the world for the first few years, and I had tremendous access to world leadership even at that time, 21 years ago. The more I met with leadership and communicated with them, I began to understand and to learn from them that the playing field was very rigged, and that there was really peace and fellowship was not factored into the business model, put it that way. And that was really what then drove me increasingly in my own work into beginning to look into true history and into the real status quo, the establishment, how it functions, and the connection between the banks and the weaponized media, weaponized academia, and essentially the control and the harvest of humanity, to speak in very simple but very blunt terms, because that's what we're dealing with. And that's been my forte really for the last 10 years. And I became a Director General in the United Nations intergovernmental sector 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I did so more or less by stealth. I wanted to understand how the multilateral playing field was being conducted. And I learned a great deal. And I also tried to shake things up at that time. And at that time, after 2 years, I recognized that the United Nations itself was deeply weaponized, and was also the utility of very deep and special interests, which did not have the interests of humanity at heart, or the ecosystems of this world, the biosphere, the environment, and so on. And so my expertise really is coming from a multiplicity of different areas of focus. I established the International Tribunal for Natural Justice in 2015, which went on to seat the Westminster seatings in 2018 on human trafficking and child sex abuse. And those seatings at that Judicial Commission of Inquiry are actually still ongoing. We've not closed the inquiry, and we are continuing with that investigation. And in the course of that inquiry, I have met with and counseled and interviewed hundreds of survivors and victims. And I've also met with dozens of investigators, researchers, police, CIA, NSA agents, intelligence and military officials. And I have a very, very comprehensive understanding of that background story, which is a desperately important one. We also launched last year, actually in Bali here, we launched the second Judicial Commission of Inquiry by the International Tribunal, and that is the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Weaponization of the Biosphere. And we had last year 26 kings, rajas, and sultans attended the festival event that we staged here, within which we held the seatings. And we had some of the world's leading figures on the front line flew in, about 15 of them, in genetically modified GMOs, in geoengineering, chemtrailing, 5G, weaponization of the pharmaceutical industries, weaponization of the agrochemical industries. So I brought together world leaders in those fields. And we began the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into weaponization of the biosphere. Also last year, some of you may know, I made a film called 5G Apocalypse, The Extinction Event, which I understand is still ranked as the #1 film on the internet, revealing and disclosing the biological science and the hard science and hard facts behind 5G, which is clearly the weaponization of our air. It's a very, very serious matter. Right now, I'm coming under tremendous attack by the lobby, the 5G lobby, and that's because it is a $10-12 trillion industry. And there are lots of special interests tied into millions of contracts there. So what we see and what we've discovered through the inquiries and through my own researches is that we've really come now to a point with this COVID-19 and Corona theater, because it is a theater. I'm not suggesting it's not, in some cases, a real threat. It is, and I can go into that. We've just been doing 3 months of seatings with some of the leading scientists and doctors in the world on the Corona COVID-19 subject. Very famous figures that many of you will have seen recently: Adele Bigtree, Robert Kennedy, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, Dr. Judy Mikovits, Dr. Rashid Buttar. It goes on. And that inquiry is leading up to the big event on June 20th and 21st, which is the World Health Sovereignty Summit, where we're also bringing together world leaders, interfaith leaders, celebrities, sports celebrities, different alliances of military veterans, alliances of justices and lawyers and advocates, all of whom also want to now be a part of the line in the sand, where we as a people really apprehend this runaway train, which we can look at as being Big Brother. I refer to it as the parent corporation, which is the supranational supra-cultural echelon that does control the Vatican complex, the Washington District of Columbia complex, and the City of London complex. And again, the history of Vatican City, London City, and Washington District of Columbia is very clear to anyone who's looked into it. They were established as a triumvirate of principalities that granted themselves the powers to oversee and engineer multi-faith. All religions are more or less contained and controlled in some sense by this echelon. And the weaponization of religions, turning Christians against Muslims and so on. This is also part of a very well studied, very well documented historical record of collusion, of conspiracy, of deception, of great fraud against the good people of the soil, as I refer to human beings. The City of London and the Crown of England has to a great extent also been weaponized over generations and has been the comptroller of essentially the world's money supply. Now that can be a good thing or a bad thing. The problem is it has been largely a bad thing. And of course the Vatican and Crown alliance moved on to essentially create the Americas. And that was a couple of 100 years ago. Washington District of Columbia has been set up essentially to begin the process over the last couple of 100 years of militarizing the planet and establishing a kind of super state police tyranny. The United Nations has emerged off the back of that as a planetary controlling utility. So the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization, for instance, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, these organs are all variously the utility of that same controlling echelon. And now we've got to a point with the Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust, the Pirbright Institute, academia from Harvard to Imperial College in London, and a multiplicity of universities involved in the researches that have led to bioweaponry. So what was released in Wuhan, China, and in Qom, Iran, and in Italy, this was absolutely a bioweapon. The jury is back in on that. The world does not know it yet fully, and that is because we've been weaponized through the media. The mainstream media absolutely control the narrative. The social media platforms have now deplatformed 90% of all of the signature speakers in the world on biology and on true science. So we only have a very controlled narrative coming out of mainstream media and also alternative media because of the deplatforming that's happened recently. So we're in a very serious position as a species and as a civilization. And I'm just very proud at the fact that there are a number of governments of the world that are standing up now as well for the good people of the world. There are parliaments in the world that are moving against this criminal, sociopathic tyranny that we're facing. And we're about to see, I believe, in the coming few months, an absolute seismic sea change in the status quo. Indictments are already underway. I am speaking on a daily basis to CIA and NSA people very, very close to Trump and also to Putin for that matter. And there are huge moves underway right now to change the status quo and to disarm it so that we can, as a people of the world, begin to reconvene and to also reclaim our sanity. And when I say that, I'll use the example of what's going on with Corona and COVID-19. We have billions of people being forced to mask themselves. This is a nonsense. There is not a serious doctor in the world who will agree with masking yourself and depleting 60% of the oxygen intake when you are trying to build your autoimmune system up precisely in order to fight off bacteria or so-called viruses. There is not a doctor in the world who would recommend that you stay out of the sun.
I've muted you. Sorry, SASHA, I've muted SASHA.
There is not a doctor in the world that would recommend that we stop walking on our pristine beaches and breathing in ionized air. This is precisely when people should be moving around with so-called herd immunity. This is well-studied, well-documented pathology of how the human biology has for millions of years dealt with any kind of a threat from a so-called virus. But the fact of the matter is that a virus is only an exosome response by all living systems to excrete the poisons that are attacking them. And so when you have a so-called viral outbreak, technically it's a good thing, because you are having a demographic of people who at the same time have reached a threshold event in their own health and wellness and their own autoimmunity, and their bodies are reacting accordingly and excreting and repelling the poisons, which manifest as what we would call a virus. Now, technically, you can't catch a virus. It doesn't jump from one human to another. So all of this is an absolute nonsense. And the entire planet is being forced into a departure from our own reason, as well as a departure from empirical science. So that's the kind of threat we're facing. And I'm afraid it's now incumbent upon us, human beings, to stand up, organize ourselves against the system. And I'm not suggesting that the system is entirely evil and malevolent. What I'm suggesting is that the system is a conspiracy of ignorance that has reached a threshold event where we have millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who are salaried technocrats and bureaucrats, and they are fulfilling functions and protocols that have been set down for them by manuals and codex books, and they simply follow orders. Ultimately, governments serve themselves. Institutions serve their own interests. We're at a threshold event when humanity has to define its own sovereignty and its own right to self-medicate and to walk about unmolested on the surface of the earth. That is our divine birthright. We did not soul migrate to this planet, you and I, over billions of years, over millions of years, over countless incarnations. We have not soul migrated to this world at this time space in order to be told by mandarins in costumes what we can do and what we cannot do. Enough is enough. And world health sovereignty must be the critical piece here. Because when we are being told that we may soon be mandatorily vaccinated with a vaccine that we know has already been created, we have the forensic evidences, we know about the 48 vaccines that have already been prepared and are going to be fast-tracked the minute human beings surrender sufficient civil liberties to the governments and to the multilateral institutions. They will enforce them mandatorily, and they will kill human beings, and they will absolutely deplete our autoimmune systems. It is a well-known fact that the overwhelming majority, if not 100%, of the so-called COVID-19 deaths can be ascribed to people who received the flu vaccination in the last year. That is a piece that is going to be coming out in the judicial inquiry and in the global class action that we intend to bring to the Supreme Courts later this year. It is very, very serious stuff. I'll leave my rant at that. I hope I've managed to cover some ground there. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you, SASHA. Yeah, I think, just one question from me, first of all, is, and I've done a lot of research into this and totally agree with everything that you've just said. And I think I've heard you say before, how do we challenge it? Because, I, for one, have carried on, really, and not allowed it to stop my flow. And if I've wanted my friends around, I've had my friends around, to be honest, and I've done it in my own little way. But what difference does that make, you know? And how can we, when the governments are pulling people and beating them up and the police are, you know, enforcing these laws, how can we?
I missed the question. I'm so sorry, Louise.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just like, for your lay person, you know, going about their business, who wants to, you know, as one singular, obviously we can't do this alone. So we need to unite, we need to stand together. And how can we do that? You know, that's, where do we go from here? Because it's okay knowing it. And, you know, everyone has their own thoughts on it, but do the research. And, you know, I for one have, and I agree with everything you've said. But what is, you know, the alternative? You know, if you fight, do you get beaten up and murdered by the police even? What's happening, you know?
Well, that's exactly what we're addressing. And that what you've raised is exactly the questions that have concerned us. And that is why we're assembling justices and law commissioners, world experts, world leaders, faith leaders, celebrities, you name it, to take a stand with this World Health Sovereignty Summit, and then to begin the class action immediately on the 22nd of June. So we're releasing, on the 21st of June, we're releasing an intelligence report that we've spent the last 3.5 months compiling with all of these world experts, economists, analysts, health administration experts, scientists and doctors. And so and intelligence experts. So we're releasing this 35-page report, white paper, intelligence report, that is the definitive study of what is behind Corona, COVID-19, and all the brutality you're seeing is just part of the enforcement of that tyranny. So the summit that we're planning, and then the global class action, is what we intend to bring into the Supreme Court to challenge under rule of law this complete violation that's happening to millions of souls around the world with illegal and unlawful orders, because you cannot be put under house arrest. There is no law in the world that allows any government to put citizens under house arrest unless you're in a state of war. But that has to be declared, and then it has to be martial law. So right now you've got presidents and prime ministers, parliamentarians and congressmen who are enforcing laws, and governors and senators enforcing statutes that they've just made up in the last week or two. And they've done it because they've been told to do it, because there are special interests driving the agenda. So the point is, we're going to continue to be bullied and traumatized by police brutality and by the interposition of the state, by penalizing us and fining us and dragging us into commercial courtrooms for the infractions or the infringement of their statutes. That's going to continue increasingly if we don't make a stand now. And that's the very point, Louise. That's why we're doing what we're doing, to say enough is enough. We've got an alliance of millions of people around the world now standing up, military veterans, justices, advocates, lawyers, celebrities, you name it. We're making a stand, and that's it. And we're taking it all the way. And then we take it to the international courts. We'll start with the Supreme Court, probably in Ireland, because Ireland is a very courageous court system, and we know how to navigate it. So we'll probably bring the class action first into the Irish Supreme Court, and from there take it further. But I don't believe we'll need to. I'm in touch again with intelligence operatives in the NSA and the CIA, and I can tell you that there is a takedown happening right now. Even today, Donald Trump made the statement that they are beginning the legislations necessary to stand down YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter from being political and partisan. So there are a lot of good signs. 10 days ago, Trump announced to the world that he was himself taking hydroxychloroquine for the last 10 days, and that it was having a great effect. Well, just that statement alone by the Commander-in-Chief of the United States was essentially a diplomatic declaration of war against the pharmaceutical industry and their tyranny. Because be sure, it is the global pharmaceutical industry base that is essentially behind this as the primary lobby.
And are they not going to be able to, because it seems like, you know, if the government's in on this and the courts run by the government, how does that work?
Well, technically, courts are not run by governments, and they're not allowed to by law. The judiciary always has to be independent. And all of these so-called democratic governments are forced by their own constitution into respecting the fact that the judiciary have separate powers. But the point is this: we have our own judges, we have our own law commissioners, we have an alliance of lawyers from around the world. So we're the ones who are bringing our own justices, law commissioners, and heads of intelligence into the courtroom. We'll play in their commercial arena, because you're right, Louise, to say that governments interfere with courts. Yes, they do. There's a lot of collusion and corruption there. But we are very vigilant of that, and we're confident that we can navigate on their statutory playing field every bit as much as we can do in our own natural law jurisdiction. Because at the end of the day, we have the will of the people standing behind what we're doing.
Wonderful. Okay, I've got so many questions, but I'm going to hand over to somebody else. So has anybody else got any questions to ask?
I've got so many questions. Sasha, I'm loving this. I'm just loving where you're going with this. I'm actually in Scotland at the moment, and we've seen the Scottish independence. We've seen one side totally clashing with the other. We've seen Brexit, and we've seen totally clashing with the other. And this seems to be yet another major clash between one and t'other. And it's really quite fascinating to watch how many people are acquiescing to whatever they're being told by, in our case, someone nobody even voted for. Neither the Prime Minister of Great Britain, nor the First Minister of Scotland were actually voted by the public, interestingly enough. Yeah. But they're there, and people are listening to them as if they were God, and they're going to tell us when we're allowed to go out, and when we're allowed to stop wearing a mask, and when we're allowed to hug people. And I just find this so fascinating. I've actually been in Texas for 3 months up until I used up the maximum allowance. Up until 10 days ago, I came back to the UK, and I was the only one on the flight back that didn't wear a mask, interestingly enough. But I'm pleased to say when I got back to London, the flight back to Scotland, none of the crew on British Airways were wearing a mask. So that was quite fascinating. But I'm loving where you're going with this. One question that sprung to mind when you were talking there was you didn't even mention 5G. And
I did mention it. I spoke to it for a while. Did you not hear that?
Tell me again.
Well, I spoke to 5G for some minutes. One moment. Are you hearing me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah. Well, there's not a lot more than I can add to the 5G apocalypse extinction event film that I put out a year ago, which really was the film that exposed the damage that is being done to the microbial cellular DNA in the human body, because that's the serious bit. In very simple terms, 99% of the cellular DNA in your body, Mike, is non-human DNA. It's microbial cellular DNA that makes up 99% of your body. So when the government testing, when they've done tests on human DNA, they will go away saying, well, it doesn't really affect human DNA, 5G. But what they haven't done is tested it on microbial cellular DNA, and that's the big concern. Are you hearing me okay, Mike? Because you jumped off the camera there.
So yeah, I'm hearing you perfectly. Thank you. So where's the association between 5G at this moment in time with coronavirus, or should we say the COVID-19 in particular?
In very simple terms, we don't even need to talk about 5G. We can talk about a threshold event that is already manifesting, connected to the electromagnetic frequency pollutions all around the world that have been building up systemically for the last half a century, essentially since radar in the Second World War was introduced. And since that time, there has been this incremental increase in mutant electromagnetic frequency radiation. Now, when everyone is connected and wired up to everything constantly, we've reached a threshold event. 5G is going to take it to the next level. And the next level is hundreds of % more dangerous than it is right now. And right now, it's out of control. 1 in 2 people, I was just informed yesterday by one of the leading cancer specialists in the United States. He said, Sasha, the truth of the matter is that 1 in 2 people are dying of cancer now. So we've reached that threshold event where we have such a contaminated environment connected principally to electromagnetic frequency radiation. Whether you're talking about the depleted uranium in the atmosphere that is still there and will be there for another 500,000 years, since all of the atomic testing in the Pacific atolls and the rocket testing that happened all around the world, not to even speak of the nuclear bombs that have actually been detonated. So we've got all of that depleted uranium in a bandwidth all around the surface of the Earth, constantly radiating back to us. And we've got all of this insane gadget-based frequency radiation coming out of every human being. It's simply out of control now. It's reached a threshold event. Is 5G being activated? Absolutely. There are test beds all over the world. And surprise, surprise, a few months before the Wuhan outbreak, that was the district which was the test bed of 5G in China. That's also part of the judicial inquiry intelligence report that comes out in 3 weeks' time.
Okay, I'm fascinated by the association and even chemtrails. I was just thinking as you were talking there, I saw 2 chemtrails over Scotland just 2 days ago. With the actually doing that, they were going one totally different direction. So they had the Scottish flag in the sky. In the last 2 days, there's been nothing whatsoever in the sky. Let me just ask one final question for now, if I may, just to go back over what I think I heard you say, which was 100% of the coronavirus deaths have had a flu shot in the last 12 months. Did you say that?
What I said, if you go back and listen to the tape, is I said that the overwhelming majority, if not 100%, because
Right.
the indicators are that we've seen, the indicators are that they are all connected to people who have had inoculations in the past. And those inoculations or vaccinations, we can systemically prove, are the very threat against autoimmunity. So this is the crazy situation that we've arrived at, when the parent corporation and all governments and the health administration chiefs are trying to force through something because it's all about the money behind it. The frontline public health administration chiefs are also servant class, Mandarin technocrats and bureaucrats who are fulfilling a function and doing what they're told to do. So these are not people who are studied in biological science. These are not people who understand how an electromagnetic frequency radiation that is incoherent as it enters the human body throws the atomic, the orbit in the atom out. The spin of the atoms gets thrown out by that incoherence. That causes metastases in the cells. That brings about disease, entropy, disease, and ultimately death. So in a very simple context, Mike, you could almost say with certainty that all disease and death is as a direct result of mutant frequency radiation. The strontium and barium and phosphates that are raining down upon us, and aluminum from the chemtrailing and the geoengineering, these are nanoparticulates. Each one of them are a chemical or a poison, and they are entirely synthetic. They're not natural to our biological systems. So when they've been put in and seeded into the atmosphere, seeded into the sky, raining down upon us for 20, 30 years, those nanoparticulates get absorbed into the human body and into all living ecosystems. They impregnate the microbiome of all living systems. And when you've got fluoridated water, since the Second World War, when they started introducing fluoride in the death camps to keep the inmates docile, it was well studied at the time by Farben and the pharmaceutical industries at that time. They knew full well that you put fluoride in the water supply, you calcify the pineal, it creates a chalky deposit around the pineal, it makes people docile, it dumbs them down. They become good wage slaves. So in 1962, thereabouts, when that former Nazi war criminal became the Secretary General of the United Nations, That was when they introduced fluoride into the United Nations protocols. And then all municipal water supplies around the world followed the code. And that's how we've had a dumbing down of people through the water supply. And then you talk about the glyphosates in the food supply through Monsanto, through genetically modified organisms for the last 2 or 3 decades, where the entire world's food supply, more or less, is entirely contaminated. So air, water, and food, synthetic molecules, do the math. Very dangerous threshold event. The autoimmune system of humanity is at critical threshold.
So I have a question on this, because I fought the idea of chemtrails in my head for so long. I mean, I literally have only just accepted it maybe just in the last couple of months, because or maybe a little bit more than that, but to my mind it just does not compute that anybody could avoid the chemtrails. So whoever they are that are deeming this to, to send pilots up there and do this, surely everybody on the planet must be getting affected. You can't possibly avoid it. So even the people that are making this happen, even their families are going to get affected. And so that's why my brain just wouldn't accept that this is possible, that someone would deliberately do that.
Well, that's fair enough. You can have a contextual framework meltdown, and you should. You would have to spend 2 hours or 3 hours in one of my workshops to understand the pathology and the chronology of this kind of madness, and how, I did say earlier on, it is an orchestration of ignorance in the main. So you've got most people pushing through agendas that they don't even understand. But please understand that the genesis point of these agendas is well documented. This is called eugenics. This is about global population control and even global depopulation. So there are certain, when you trigger 5G in a certain way, are you hearing me okay?
Yep.
If you trigger the 5G signal in a certain way, you can dial it in to the isotope frequencies coming out of a particular demographic. You could choose the wheat crop in Botswana, and you could get the isotope frequency of that particular genetic strain of wheat that entire country is dependent on, and you can target that using the 5G. So the entire planet is weaponized when 5G rolls out. They can dial into the isotope frequency of Black Africans, Sub-Saharan Africans, Mesoamericans, whatever genetic type they want. This is the ultimate tool, manipulation, control, and harvest for an invisible mastery. And that is the problem. And yes, there are sociopaths in this world who are beyond evil. If you'd sat through any of the seatings that we took in Westminster into ritual satanic abuse and child sacrifice, blood drinking, the ninth circle satanic cults and black masses that have been going on all around the world for centuries, you have to be in those seatings. They're online. I suggest you watch them. You can begin to understand how the sociopathic mind works when you understand what's been done to people for thousands of years, certainly for hundreds of years. But again, I'd be happy to let you look in on one of my 2 or 3 hour long workshops, and there I create the entire history. But it's not something I can answer in 5 minutes. I can't describe the mind of George Soros to you in 5 minutes.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Once you start to go down that whole route of potential conspiracy theories, and you look at the 9/11 buildings coming down, and once you start looking into JFK death or even man walking on the moon, and you start going, wait a minute, I don't want to do this, but actually it's all now starting to make more sense or not making any sense whatsoever.
I agree entirely. I'm just moving my position because I'm running out of juice on my phone. Going to just plug in my battery. So look,
I feel like I'm dominating this conversation.
Believe me,
Sorry, Sasha.
We can move on. But for 21 years, I've been on this trail for 21 years. But thank you to you.
Just the sound's not so good there, Sasha. Just hopefully we can still hear you.
Are you hearing me now?
Oh, yes, we are, yeah. I think Joanne just messaged me and said she had a question. Joanne, are you on there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Yes, I can.
Hi.
Hi.
Love. Hi, Sasha. Thanks for joining us on this
Hi.
tonight. It's great. There's a few of us listening in the room. Hello. Couple of questions. So, at the moment, since we've had lockdown, I've been really looking into the Universal Law Community Trust and finding it extremely enlightening to remove ourselves from the whole ownership of the Crown and the government, removing our birth certificates and creating our own Minister MFN, basically. Is this something that you think that you see a future in, of people ministering their own lives?
Yes.
I've literally assigned most of my estate and my liability over to the Universal Law Community Trust, and I'm ministering my own life, as it were. And I would love to be able for this to really completely spread out over the world. But we obviously have an issue with indoctrination with many, many people that obviously the older they are, like my parents, just can't get hold of this concept because we have been ruled by governors for so many years. And they're like, well, how can we cope without a government? We need our pills and we need our potions and we need our hospitals and all this kind of thing. So I don't know, it's just something to open up, really. But how do we spread? I mean, I know that you do a program yourself, do you, with the New Earth Project, with Universal Law? So
Yeah.
I'm just, anyway, I'll hand it over. It's not really a question.
No, I understand. I think you're absolutely correct, and I salute you. I salute you for being an early bird in the UCC filings and establishing your sovereignty and beginning that process of disentanglement from the fiction of the Crown and the fiction of your birth bond. And, you know, of course, it's very difficult for your parents' generation and for older generations to understand these questions of sovereignty. And there's a lot of cultural trauma still in the older generations where they reflex into the idea that Winston Churchill with his big cigar was a great guy and just rescued the world. To some extent, that was true. But there was also a lot of criminal collusion with the British Crown in the Nazi empire, connected to Wall Street and connected to, you know, very, very nasty agendas. And that's the truth of the matter. You can't have that conversation with people who suffered in the Second World War. They don't particularly want to engage that conversation. But I salute you for being an early bird. Yes, I do see the absolute dissolution of governments as we know them today. I believe that within 7 years from now, certainly by 2030, that there will not be any corporation governments left on the face of the earth. The truth of the matter is they are all in foreclosure already. They actually went into foreclosure technically in the first quarter of 2013. By April 2013, the Vatican went into foreclosure technically, which was why Ratzinger fled office. He sought clemency from the president of Italy and then went into cloisters to a life of prayer, if you believe that. But the fact of the matter is that the Jesuit Pope was brought forward at that time and began the process of a soft demolition of the Vatican complex, which we've seen since 2013, 2014. The revelations of the pedophilia in the Catholic Church for generations. Only this week, I believe it is, the Pope also came out and apologized about the fact that many of the priest orders and nunneries were rape factories and breeding factories. The horror of so much of the evil in the church is being exposed. And that is not to throw everyone under a bus. There are a hell of a lot of good priests, hell of a lot of good nuns there. The evil has been compartmentalized away from them in the same way that it is not the British government that is evil. It is a shadow government operating in a compartmentalized arena within the government that is evil. The banking system itself is not evil, but there is a highly compartmentalized element within the central banks that are absolutely evil. And that's the difference. And that's why people have a hard time understanding the context of shadow government versus government. But I salute you, and I think you're on the right track. Yes, we've been teaching people for some time. I've made a number of films on the subject and done a lot of research on the subject. And the fact of the matter is that all humans can withdraw their contract with government, and they should do. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I've muted. Yeah, I've unmuted you now.
So, yeah, my son just ran in and said he needed a poo. Sorry. Another question by the lovely lady next to me here was, do you think there will be disclosure on a mass scale through media of citizens for everything that has been going on?
And
yes. They carry on. Ask the question. Yeah.
No, that's it. Just the breakdown of the mass media doctrine that is being fed. I know everyone is trying to organize, and we've got amazing leaders like you around the world, but in terms of the mass media that's being fed to indoctrinate everyone and poison the minds, will that be broken down in the foreseeable?
Well, it's amazing that you're asking me the question today. It's amazing because it was only this morning that I spent an hour on the telephone, on a Zoom platform with the white hat, quote unquote, who has been charged by Donald Trump and the Pentagon with the process of beginning the auto-destruct of the mainstream media. So yes, in short, that is absolutely going to be taking place. Servers are going to be melted and taken down. It's all going to be largely beginning after the 21st of June. Curiously enough, the same day that we're doing the World Health Sovereignty Summit. We've been given some real assurance that Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube principally are going to be regulated out of their existing format and forced to become the utility of the people. Now, that's going to be a process. It's going to be a legal process that the Candace Owen in the United States is actually suing Facebook. So she's that very brilliant and beautiful black young lady who is an incredible voice for change. And she's taken upon herself to sue, I think, Facebook and or Twitter. And she's going to be taking that into the High Court. But the fact of the matter is that it is a process which might take a year or two, certainly no longer than that. But yes, they are being taken down. The mainstream media is not going to survive the second term of President Trump should he get in later this year. Of course, the bets are off on that. If you ask me as a political analyst and as a pundit, I would suggest that Trump is going to come in on a landslide victory that we've never seen before. And frankly, I hope that that is the case, not because I love the man, but because I have studied every single executive presidential order that has come from his pen in the last 4 years. And either the man is a living saint or he's got a bunch of very, very good intelligence and military operatives in the basement who have all of them become somewhat enlightened as human beings and are clawing this world back from Luciferianism. And I use that term, it's shocking, but we are coming out of a Luciferian cycle of a civilization where we have been, all of us, involved in idolatry, monotheistic idolatry, and we've been in a perpetual cycle of blood cult, which is war, disease, and poverty. And we permissioned it, and it's happened. And now we're emerging from that deep galactic sleep. But the fact of the matter is that mainstream media and also the social media platforms is the same thing. They should all be called mainstream media. But the fact of the matter is that they are the last thing that is standing between humanity and our capacity to remember who we are and enter into our own enlightenment. Because the weaponized media is the dream spell machine. Hollywood has already been taken down. Since Harvey Weinstein went down, the dominoes are toppling and the indictments are underway. The Hollywood machine is pretty much grinding to a halt. And mainstream media is being taken down now, and that's going to take a year or two. But on the backside of that, I think we'll see a very different world emerging, because freedom of speech will be completely unfettered at that time. And we'll all be able to speak uncensored. So the common human pulse is the thing that is going to emerge. And after 21 years of moving around this planet, speaking to tens of thousands of people, many of them kings, presidents, prime ministers, all the way down to radical activists and grassroots movements, I have such a wealth of experience in the spectrum of humanity. And I've lived in every continent by now in the last 21 years. And I can tell you, as far as I'm concerned, the common human pulse is on the brink of enlightenment anyway. It's just being held back from that by weaponized media and corporations masquerading as governments that are penalizing us.
Thank you. Sasha, I think we've only got time for like one more question. I'm going to hand it over. I think Mark wanted to ask a question. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yes, Sasha, I've watched a lot of your videos over the years, and I've followed a lot of your work, and I totally agree with a lot of the things that you're saying for sure. I've been considered a conspiracy theorist myself for about 20 years as well. So, so a lot of the things that you talk about are things that I've been telling people about for years also. But one of the things that I'm interested to get your take on is, obviously, the things that you're talking about here are about effectively breaking the system down, the one that exists currently. I mean, what do you see as its replacement in terms of governance models, and who do you see as being the key players in a system like that would replace it?
I think we're going to be returning to a very different kind of planetary construct. I think that with the dissolution of corporation governments, you're going to see a decentralization of humanity in every way possible. So I think you're going to see a diaspora happening of people moving away from cities and tenement buildings and moving back into reconvention with the land. Essentially, that's the key piece here, is reconvening the relationship between humans and the land and the soil. This is the integral part here. We need to try and understand the historical context of princes and popes and kings and emperors and queens and empresses in history, who have effectively tried to control and contain their populations. So cities emerged in quite an unhealthy context. First, as fortresses to protect a group of people against marauders. Then they grew into becoming cities, all based on fear. Fear reflexivity was the source code of the emergence of all towns and then cities. Before that, you had hamlets, small villages, hamlets and towns, but you never had cities. So cities, in a sense, are a kind of socioeconomic cancer that have emerged over the last couple of 100 years. And they don't serve the living, they serve the dead. That's where war and disease and poverty proliferate, essentially because of that. So what we're going to see is a deconstruction of that, with people moving back to villages and towns and hamlets, moving back to the soil and creating more agrarian economies. And that, of course, is entirely appropriate, because what we don't want is to continue a centralized, usurious-based scarcity economics model, because that also is the thing that maintains war and disease and poverty. So in simple terms, I don't think we're going to be moving into any kind of a governmental construct 2.0. I think people are going to move into a very different kind of decentralized, almost blockchain type auto-governance taking place in different towns and hamlets and regions. But at the same time, there will have to be a standing down of the militarization. So there's got to be a universal consensus that all weapons of destruction, not just mass destruction, all tanks, all military aircraft, all rockets, all guns need to be decommissioned in a kind of universal bonfire. But I do believe that our spiritual consciousness collectively in 7 to 10 years from now will reach that point where we realize the insanity of anyone being armed against anyone else. And so certain universal laws or natural laws will come back into play. Almost certainly, we already begin to see the onset of that in some cases. And I will cite 2 countries, and you won't believe them. But one is the United States of America, that has already started to downsize the government hugely. Trump began on day one 4 years ago by saying, every new statute that comes on the statute books, I will only allow it if I see 3 other statutes taken off the statute books. We're not going to continue regulating everything. We're going to start deregulating. And that's exactly what's happened. And in fact, today in America, for every new statute that's brought to the statute books, they're decommissioning about 10 to 12 statutes. So we're seeing a 1000% deconstruction of central government happening already in the United States. Now, the mainstream media are not talking about that because it terrifies them. They're losing the control. The controllers are losing the control. The invisible masters are losing the control. In Russia, Putin is doing very much the same thing, believe it or not. He's beginning to encourage people to leave the cities and go back to the land, just like they did 300 years ago in Midwest America. Go and stake your land. And he's saying to people, if you want to go back and farm, get back to the land, I'll give you the land. The state will hand it to you. So we're already seeing that phenomenon happen, believe it or not, in Russia and China and other parts of the world.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, like an economic model that could be put in place in order to manage a new system like that, how do you see that playing out?
Again, it has to be, we have to learn from blockchain on this. It's about contracts, private contracts. It's about you and me agreeing to something and entering a covenant, entering a contract. And that contract is logged. We sign it, it gets logged, it can't be changed. We can only go back by consensus and change it. And when you have millions of people around the world, at the town level, the village level, the local community level, who themselves are policing themselves. Look, I live in Bali, in Indonesia. Indonesia is the biggest Muslim population in the world, 300 million Muslims. There are 17,600 islands in Indonesia. Bali is only one of them. But in Bali, I live in a district called Ubud. And in the district of Ubud, I live in a village called Kiliki. In Kiliki, they have the elders of the village and the warrior class of the village become known as the Banja. They consult the women, but they enforce all the laws. The men of the village are entirely responsible for that. They'll bring police in certain instances, but mostly the police stay away. They self-police communities because they all know one another. Nothing gets stolen. There's never been an instance of rape or murder ever in history because they are self-policing communities. And the Indonesian government is smart enough to know that they can't screw with the Balinese model of local auto governance. And the point is that that's entirely appropriate, that your local town or neighborhood will establish its own ecosystem. And they will establish their own covenants, their own values, their own principles. And if people agree with them when they come in, great. They sign up to that charter. We never needed central government. Central government was only ever put into place by the bankers in order to harvest human beings, penalize them and tax them to death. We don't need to be paying taxes. We shouldn't pay any taxes whatsoever other than merchant taxes. Business taxes are appropriate, but even they shouldn't be as ridiculously high as they are. Governments do not use your income tax to maintain the streets or the lamps. I can prove this out to you. Governments use income taxes essentially for war and for maintaining an endless cycle of war. So that's all you need to know about governments. Govern means control. Ment is Latin for mind. mind control. It's in the word of government. It always was. Governments are a criminal construct and a sociopathic culture that has emerged. I'm the man who you're talking to who has sat down with presidents, prime ministers, kings and queens and had this very conversation with them on multiple occasions. Multiple. I've met with ambassadors, plenipotentiaries, ministers from all walks of life, interfaith leaders from around the world. I've had the same conversation, and I can tell you 90% of the time they've been in full agreement with me. Absolutely. But they've said, how the hell can we orchestrate a deconstruction of a complex that is so vast and that we as prime ministers or presidents of a country have absolutely no control over? Because ultimately we're controlled by international treaties. And those are engineered by the international banksters. So it is a complex story. But the fact of the matter is we are already seeing a deconstruction of that monolithic centralized control mechanism. This corona COVID pantomime is absolutely the last, the death rattle of that evil empire. It's the last attempt to force mandatory vaccinations into all human beings and trigger the 5G signaling and have metadata control, surveillance, chipping, tagging over every human being on the face of the earth. If they succeed, we must not allow this to succeed. I don't believe it will, but there's still a hell of a battle ahead of us. And we are very much on the front line with what we're doing with the World Health Sovereignty Summit and the global class action that we're launching later in June.
And how can we support that? Just because I know you have to go soon, Sasha.
No. I'm staying on. I'm going to stay on for another half hour if you want me. I'll run away if you've got other things to do. But I think these are great questions and they're so important, and I'm really happy to answer them.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, how we can support that and how we can help with the summit. You know, can we attend? What do we need to do?
Yes, I can absolutely arrange for you all to attend if you just give me your numbers, and we'll make sure that you can attend it. Most of it's going to be pre-recorded. We have no choice because everyone's around the world in different time zones, and we've got so many people participating. So we're actually compositing most of it as pre-recorded and then putting it all back to back on the day with the declaration event. And then the end bit is going to be live. But absolutely, you can attend it. We need people to share the hell out of it. We need people to help crowdfund the class action. That's the main piece, because we need to march this in to the Supreme Courts. We need to hold all of these public health administration chiefs accountable for this lawlessness that is allowing police brutality to prevail and the technocratic tyranny to prevail. Don't forget that millions of people have died in the last few weeks all around the world in hospitals and hospices and in their own homes, and they've not been allowed to be in the embrace of their own family members. That is probably the gravest crime against humanity outside of outright genocide. For the tyranny of the state to prevent people dying with their families. That's insane. And that's what we've arrived at. So there are people who need to be held account so that this never happens again. And so that there is never again an auto-destruct of the global economy through a panic and a hysteria that is not backed up by any science whatsoever. It's a madness, and we have to address it ourselves, because no government is empowered to address this for us. They are all under the control of a multilateral a treaty arrangement. It has to come from people of the world. And we've got to march this in like David to Goliath. We've got to take that slingshot to the giant.
Brilliant. We've got time for one more question. I think Lorraine is, are you wanting to ask a question, Lorraine? Let me unmute you.
Hello. Hi. No, it wasn't a question. It was just like a thank you, a real big thank you, because how you're speaking, I'm like a type of character that listens to the heart, you know, and just how you come across and everything. And you've, it was so funny because me and my husband watched you for the very first time last night. And we put on YouTube, and we said, and we watched you just out of the blue, never heard of you or anything before. And you blew us away there, and we were saying, "Oh, this guy's really good, isn't he?" So, we were like, and then Lou sent me a message, and she says, "Oh, would you sing for me?" sort of thing like that. And I just had my internet fixed. And she said, "Will you sing for me?" And she says, "Oh, I got SASHA Stone on." I said, "No way." I said, "We just watched him the very first time." I said, "Yeah, of course I'll come and sing for you," sort of thing. So it's very, very, very lovely to meet you. And you've got a lovely heart, man. And I really sort of like appreciate listening to you, and will listen more. Because it's a lot.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you. That's very kind. I very much appreciate those words, especially it's at 3:30 in the morning. It's very kind of you. Thank you.
We're going to let you go to bed now. And I'm sure we could ask questions all night. And if anyone's got any questions for SASHA, perhaps you can email them. And
no, Louise, honestly, if you want me to answer a couple more, please make use of me now. I'm happy to do it. But if you've got other business, then you can get on with that.
Okay. Well, shall we have one or two more questions? Yeah. Go on then, Craig. Big advocate for 5G, actually a radiation specialist in his own right, what he does for a job. So this is going to be good.
Yeah.
You just not speaking, please.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can't hear. Louise, are you hearing Craig?
Craig, can't hear you. Have you unmuted?
Is that better?
Yeah, it's a little bit crackly.
Okay. Just a quick question. Obviously, to deal with any problem, I need to deal with the root cause of the problem. And in terms of 5G, in terms of if we can't immediately stop that, is there the 5G BioShield? Is that anything that you would still recommend?
Did we get that?
I'm so sorry, Louise. Could you repeat that for me, please, Louise?
It's tricky to hear you there, Craig, but I think he said, is there anything that we can do right now to stop the 5G radiation, and something about a biofield?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that, because I was talking to the BioShield crew today. The BBC have started their hatchet job on the 5G BioShield, and they're syndicating their hatchet job around the world just today. So it's very interesting that Craig asked that question. Was he asking if I endorse or support it?
Yeah, he was saying, do you think it's going to help? And
1000% I endorse that technology. I've been strategizing only today with lawyers and PR people. I've spoken to a couple of the team member of BioShield, because they're under attack today by the BBC, who've trying to do a hatchet job on the technology. They've clearly chosen 5G BioShield because it's having huge success. Many, many thousands of people around the world, I think 6,500, 7,000 people in the last few weeks, are having miraculous effects with it. Most of the people who've been purchasing that 5G BioShield have done so because they're suffering seriously from EMF radiation. And I can't talk about the testimonials, but I've read about 100 or so of them, and I'm blown away. But more than that, I've studied, my foundation, we've studied the 4 separate clinical trials, clinical studies that were done since, I think, November last year in Switzerland, Belgium, France, and Germany. And the dark field microscopy, blood analysis, and the heart rate variability is off the chart. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And not just one or two, hundreds of people who've been brought into these clinical studies. So you've got a very brave company set up and around a brilliant physicist called Professor, I can't remember his full name, it's Lakisevic, who's a Serbian physicist, absolute genius, if you ask me. I first met him 12 years ago when I was chairing the Global Breakthrough Energy Congress in Holland. And I never heard of him up until late last year, when this BioShield technology was brought to my attention, and I checked it out. And then I met with the professors, and he's former at Max Planck Institute. I think for 10 years he was a director there, until he decided that after 30 odd years in physics in some of the top institutes in the world, he decided that academia was completely criminal, weaponized, and we're refusing to move into the breakthrough arena. And so he pulled out, and for 10 years sold his own house, financed his own research, and he came up with this nanofoil technology. Again, the clinical studies speak for themselves. Bottom line answer to you, Craig, is yes, I stand by it 100%.
Thank you.
It seems, thank you so much. It seems like there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I think, you know, more than ever, just to sum up a little bit, because we have got some projects waiting to present. It seems like, you know, light is at the end of the tunnel, but by no means is this job done. Things are there, things are developing. I was really positive from you there, Sasha. But I think, you know, the most important thing is we're not complacent. You know, we want to support and help and share the information as much as we have been doing, and a little bit more. And I think, you know, it's the power of the people, isn't it? You know, no man can do this on their own. So as much as we can do to support you, I think everybody will agree. You know, just please let us know, and I will fire on the emails to everybody else, and I'm sure they will share it with their networks as well. And if anyone else has got any questions, perhaps you could email them to me, and Sasha, if he's got a minute, he's so busy, but might have a chance to answer them. And thank you, Sasha, so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. And thank you, everyone. Much
Thank
appreciated. Lovely meeting you.
It really has been wonderful. And we're here, and I'm sure we're all going to pull together, and we've got this. We're going to do it. It's going to be a better world at the end of it all. And thank you for all the work you're doing.
God bless. Bye-bye now.
Good night. God bless.
Good night.
Right, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Wow. Wow, awesome. So there we go. And thank you. I'm sure you've got more questions, but it's just a little bit of a time thing tonight. Bless you.